Supreme Court has just issued a major ruling.
Major Second Amendment case.
Major Supreme Court ruling.
It's a case that legal experts will be watching closely.
What's it take for an officer to determine there's an emergency and then enter into your home?
Constitutional protections of your home are absolute.
It's a law that stood for more than a century, but the court has now said that that law cannot stand.
Well, later today, a landmark civil rights case is set to be argued before the Supreme Court.
So another unanimous ruling from the Supreme Court.
Loophole the police are using to get inside your home without a warrant. But a unanimous Supreme Court ruling gives you the power to stop them.
We have breaking news. The Supreme Court has just ruled a family can sue the FBI for damages after their house was wrongly raided.
Family can get justice after federal agents raid the wrong homes.
Police showing up at the wrong address or receiving bad intelligence, storming in, damaging a house, traumatizing a family, and then having no responsibility for their actions.
This is something that actually comes from common law England, the idea that the king is sovereign and the government has to waive that sovereign immunity, which the United States Congress did.
Flashbangs detonated inside a suburban Atlanta home at dawn. Federal agents stormed through broken doors with weapons drawn. A 7-year-old child, a boyfriend, and a woman named Katrina Martin were dragged outside at gunpoint. None of them had criminal records. None of them were the target. The FBI had raided the wrong house. When the family tried to sue, the federal government made a stunning argument. You have no right to hold us accountable. We're immune. That defense worked in lower courts. Federal judges agreed that even catastrophic mistakes were protected by government immunity. The case seemed over before it began. Then the Supreme Court took the case, and in a decision that shocked legal observers, all 9 justices, every single one, regardless of ideology, sided against the government. The unanimous ruling didn't just reject the FBI's immunity claim, it potentially rewrote the rules for how Americans can hold federal agencies accountable when they violate constitutional rights. This isn't just about one family or one botched raid. This is about whether federal agents can operate above the law, make reckless mistakes, and face zero consequences. And the Supreme Court just said no. The raid happened in 2017. The FBI was targeting alleged gang members in suburban Atlanta. Special Agent Lawrence Guerrero was leading the operation. His team had a specific address, a home linked to criminal activity that was their lawful target. But Guerrero didn't verify the location through official agency navigation systems. Instead, he entered the address into his personal phone's GPS. That simple decision sent the entire team to the wrong house, a quiet family home where no crime had occurred. The scene escalated rapidly into a full tactical raid. Flashbangs exploded, doors were smashed. Katrina Martin, her boyfriend, and her 7-year-old child were inside when heavily armed agents burst through multiple entry points. They were detained at gunpoint, held outside while agents searched the house. Only after examining mail with the correct address did agents realize their mistake. They had terrorized an innocent family because someone used consumer GPS instead of following proper protocols. The family filed a lawsuit under the Federal Tort Claims Act, a rare legal pathway that allows citizens to sue the federal government for its employees' actions. The FTCA includes specific exceptions designed to protect government operations, but it also creates limited circumstances where accountability is possible. The Department of Justice immediately moved to dismiss the case. They argued 2 key immunity exceptions protected the agents: the intentional tort exception and the discretionary function exception. According to the DOJ's interpretation, even a mistaken raid using bad judgment still didn't qualify for a lawsuit because agents were exercising discretion during official duties. Here's where the legal argument becomes crucial. The intentional tort exception protects federal agents from claims like assault or false arrest when they're performing official functions. The discretionary function exception shields officials when they make judgment calls or policy decisions during their work. The government claimed both exceptions applied, creating an impenetrable legal shield. Lower courts sided with the government. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the FBI's immunity held, even in this case of obvious error. The family's lawsuit was dismissed. It appeared the federal government had successfully established that no matter how reckless the mistake, they could never be held liable for wrongful raids. But the Supreme Court saw it differently. After the family petitioned for review, the justices granted cert, agreeing to hear the case. And in a rare display of complete unanimity, they issued a 9-0 ruling rejecting the 11th Circuit's interpretation. Justice Neil Gorsuch authored the opinion that dismantled the government's immunity argument. The court held that the exceptions were misapplied in this context. Using a personal phone's GPS instead of official agency systems wasn't protected discretionary judgment. It was a violation of established protocols that led directly to constitutional violations. The decision didn't automatically award damages to the family. Instead, it remanded the case back to the 11th Circuit for re-review under the correct legal interpretation. But the message was unmistakable. Federal agencies cannot rely on overbroad immunity claims when their actions violate citizens' rights, especially inside their own homes. This was more than a procedural correction. It was a warning shot putting every federal agency on notice that blanket immunity won't shield them from accountability when lives, homes, and constitutional rights are at stake. Now that the Supreme Court has remanded the case, the Department of Justice has been ordered to file a new response. They requested an extension, citing various administrative delays, but they can only postpone for so long. The 11th Circuit must now decide the case with the Supreme Court's guidance firmly in place. The DOJ must file a supplemental brief addressing how the ruling affects their immunity claims. The 11th Circuit will re-review the facts under the corrected legal framework, and the federal government cannot escape relitigation simply by claiming the same immunity exceptions that were just rejected. This case could fundamentally reshape future lawsuits involving mistaken raids, wrongful seizures, and violations of constitutional rights by federal agents. For the first time in years, citizens have a clearer path to sue the government when rights are violated, even when agents claim they were just doing their jobs. Though this case wasn't directly about firearms, it sets critical precedent that could influence ongoing Second Amendment battles. The 2022 Bruin decision established that modern gun laws must align with historical tradition. Martin v. United States builds on that principle by reinforcing that government agencies cannot use vague policy justifications to override individual rights. Bruin limits state power by requiring historical justification for gun restrictions. Martin limits federal immunity by rejecting vague policy shields that protect government overreach. Together, they form a stronger constitutional framework for defending individual rights against government action. Future lawsuits may cite both cases to challenge unjust enforcement actions. This creates particularly important implications for gun owners who face federal raids, confiscations, or enforcement actions. When the ATF or FBI conducts operations involving firearms, they must now operate knowing that immunity won't automatically protect them if they violate constitutional rights. Federal agencies have long used policy discretion to justify raids, seizures, and investigations with minimal fear of accountability. The Martin ruling forces those agencies to operate with substantially more caution. They can no longer rely on, "we thought we were following proper procedures," as an automatic shield against lawsuits. ATF raids involving firearm seizures could now face increased legal challenges if protocols aren't followed precisely. FBI search warrants must meet higher standards or face potential civil liability. Mistaken identity or faulty intelligence will no longer guarantee legal protection under blanket immunity. Agencies must reassess their use of force protocols, their verification procedures, and their search warrant execution standards. This could trigger waves of internal policy reviews at federal law enforcement agencies. The fear of being sued and losing will change how operations are planned and executed. It could also shift how gun owners are treated in controversial cases, especially situations where raids occur but no criminal charges are ultimately filed. The threat of civil liability creates powerful incentive for agencies to verify information, follow established protocols, and avoid reckless actions that violate rights. This decision doesn't mean the federal government is now open season for lawsuits. The FTCA still includes legitimate immunity protections for government functions, but it does create a narrower, more clearly defined path for legitimate lawsuits when rights are genuinely violated. For civil liberties groups and wrongly accused citizens, this represents a huge step forward. Not every case will succeed. Plaintiffs must still prove actual violations occurred, but more cases will now survive early dismissal motions based on blanket immunity claims. Victims of wrongful federal action have a new legal avenue that didn't clearly exist before. Courts may now examine facts more closely instead of automatically deferring to agency immunity claims, and the chilling effect on reckless enforcement may deter future abuse by making agencies think twice before cutting corners on constitutional protections. We're likely to see an uptick in FTCA lawsuits, especially from people harmed by mistaken raids or overzealous enforcement that violated clearly established rights. The playing field just shifted meaningfully in favor of individual accountability, and government agencies understand the implications. Legal scholars are already analyzing Martin for its long-term impact. Some experts warn this could trigger costly litigation waves against the government. Others argue it brings much-needed balance to civil rights enforcement. Constitutional law professors suggest this restores judicial oversight over potential abuse of government power. Government attorneys are reviewing internal policies to limit liability exposure going forward. Whether you focus on civil liberties, gun rights, or constitutional protections generally, one conclusion is inescapable. The era of largely unchecked federal immunity is ending. This ruling could become foundational in future battles over everything from red flag law enforcement to property confiscation to firearms raids. The Martin decision is already being cited in new civil rights cases. Lower courts will now have to revisit how they apply FTCA exceptions. That ripple effect could extend to high-profile cases involving wrongful raids or confiscations, particularly those touching on Second Amendment issues. Watch for Martin being cited in new federal civil rights lawsuits challenging government overreach. Expect agencies to update operational protocols to avoid triggering liability. Future gun rights cases may invoke Martin to challenge federal enforcement actions. Congress may even respond with legislative attempts to clarify or potentially retighten immunity protections. This is why staying informed about these legal developments matters profoundly. What happened in Martin versus United States isn't just a technical legal victory. It represents a shift in how the system operates, a recalibration of the balance between government power and individual rights. For too long, the federal government operated under rules that made accountability nearly impossible when mistakes violated constitutional rights. But this time, the Supreme Court drew a clear line. Martin versus United States is more than a 9-0 ruling. It's a signal that accountability is returning and that no agency operates above the Constitution. As citizens who believe in meaningful limits on government power, this case provides a new tool, one that reminds federal agencies that when they violate rights, there can be consequences. The legal landscape is changing, and this time the change favors individual liberty over government immunity. The fight is far from over. Agencies will test the boundaries of this ruling. Lower courts will have to apply it to new fact patterns. But for the first time in years, the momentum has shifted toward accountability when federal power is abused. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.